right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for our latest ALTA Insights webinar. I'm Jeremy Yohe, Alta's Vice President of Communications, and we've got a great presentation lined up today that's going to dig into emerging wire fraud schemes and looking at the PowerPoint as we discuss the use of deepfakes. So I'm intrigued to learn about that. And also more importantly, our experts are going to spend a little time discussing tools and strategies that you all title and escrow companies can implement to better protect yourselves and your clients. Before starting, I do need to touch on a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. You'll get a link tomorrow to the recording. You can always access all of our webinar recordings at alta.org/webinars. The email will also include a link to download a copy of today's presentation, which can be accessed now from the handout section in the GoToWebinar window pane. And there are a few other resources available to download. One is a handout Alta members can provide to consumers to educate them about wire fraud. If you go to the website, you actually have the ability to brand it with your own company logo and information. The second document in the handouts section is a report that highlights court decisions addressing wire fraud liability. And then a third is an article about the 3 R's to cyber defense and response. If at any time you have a question for the panelists, the presentation, submit them in the questions box. We'll hold some time at the end for Q&A. And with that, let me briefly introduce today's speakers. Both will provide a little bit more detail about themselves. Joining us today, we have Jewel Quintine. Jewel is a senior title operations consultant for Qualia. An attorney. Jewel has worked for several law firms as well as OS National prior to joining Qualia. So Jewel, thank you for joining us. And also joining us today is Nikki Flager. Nikki is a specialty deposits RM lead at Arkansas-based Encore Bank. She has over 17 years of banking experience, focusing on helping businesses reduce risk. Nikki, thank you also for joining us. And with that, Jewel, I will be quiet and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that kind introduction. I'm very excited for today's conversation. You know, at Qualia, we're really dedicated to equipping our businesses with tools and strategies to enhance both efficiency and security. And, you know, as part of the professional services team here at Qualia, I work with a lot of customers who operate nationwide. And cybersecurity and wire fraud mitigation are top of mind. They're always asking about what's happening in the market and how can they strengthen their process. So this is a critical topic, and I'm so excited to be discussing this with you, Nikki.
Thank you, Jewel, and thank you, Jeremy, for the introduction. At Encore, we specialize in the banking needs of our title clients. So we are working with title companies across the country. And we also want to help our clients enhance the security and streamline their day-to-day operations. I've seen fraud impact businesses across many industries throughout my banking career, and cyber fraud remains one of the biggest threats. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I do certainly agree that this is an issue that directly impacts all of our businesses.
All right, well, let's get into it. So a couple of things we'll talk through today. Obviously, we'll talk about the landscape that we're dealing with, some recent insights and trends that we're seeing, the importance of this conversation, just why now? And then ultimately, we want all of our attendees to walk away with tactics to safeguard your business, you know, and using your people, process, and technology, giving you ways in each of those categories to do that. And then if we have some time at the end, answer your questions that you might have put in the chat. So diving in, so wire fraud threats are becoming more sophisticated. On the slide here, we have some jarring statistics about what's happening in the industry. I want to highlight a few of them. So 145 million in adjusted losses were suffered in 2023 due to cybercrime. Now, we already know that real estate transactions are a prime target due to the high volume, high cost of those transactions, and one or two of those can truly bring in a profit for these cyber fraud actors. So already the amount of money being lost to these crimes really make it important for us to be vigilant in our efforts. And then another really important statistic is that 1 in 4 title companies experience at least one seller impersonation attempt in 2023. Now, that's a 2023 statistic. I'm sure once 2024 statistics come out, that number would increase, and I'm sure the attendees would agree that it's probably increased and they've seen it more frequently in their business. It's really important that everyone is being mindful of how this landscape is increasing. And Nikki, you know, we see these statistics on the Qualia side, but is this reflective of what you're seeing in the banking world?
Absolutely, and I certainly see that rising constantly. These are conversations we're having weekly with clients, and the threat is always there. There's always some creative attempt that someone has. And as you mentioned, the real estate transactions are attractive, and there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, you're working with consumers that are not used to, you know, handling transactions, you know, personal emails and things like that. So I certainly see this and these statistics increasing over time.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think that's truly reflective of what everyone is seeing. I want to take it back to our attendees. You know, we want to hear from you all. An important part of this conversation is talking amongst one another about what we're seeing. So we have a quick poll question. Make sure everyone's with us. So how often has your business experienced wire fraud attempts in the past 12 months? Have these increased, decreased, or remained the same? So go ahead, answer the poll question, drop your answer so we can kind of see what's trending. And while our audience members are answering the poll question, Nikki, I'm curious from you, what emerging threats have you seen in the past 12 months from your experience?
So I can say that the business email compromise is always one of the most common. However, we are hearing a lot more of the deep fakes and seller impersonations. That's becoming more and more of a threat as technology is becoming more apparent that it's, you know, growing and evolving. And just recently, I had a client that was able to catch it in time, but it was still very scary. I had a client that was working with a property owner that, or she thought she was working with a property owner. It was a deal that came across her desk, and his name was very common, but John. But luckily, she was able to recognize that all the documentation that was provided for John and his property, the way he signs his name, John, but his email was only Jon. So there was a couple of things there that, you know, stood out and, you know, caused her to do a little bit more digging. And luckily she did. She, you know, did a lot more research on his records, saw he owned 5 city blocks in the area that, you know, this property that he was trying to sell. And in her experience, that was unusual. So she sent a certified letter to this individual based on the registered address, not the one in the email that was being provided from the customer. And sure enough, it was a fraud attempt. And luckily she was diligent and, you know, did that extra research, but those things are happening more and more.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, Nikki, you know, of us having to be diligent and paying attention to those details. And looking at the poll results, audience members say they've either remained the same for their business or they have increased. Those are the two most popular answers. And it truly aligns, you know, last year, Qualia, we did a survey with our customers to dive into the frequency of wire attacks, and response was similar. 95% of our customers said that it remained the same or increased. And so it really speaks to that fraud is truly becoming a more complex and multi-layered process, you know. Here on this slide, you can see the different areas and ways that cyber attackers are targeting businesses, and they're throwing multiple of these at the wall. They only need one to stick. So all of these are being employed on businesses, and you could see any form or combination of these. So phishing and email compromise were the top ranked threats in 2024. And then while ransomware may not be common, but when it happens badly. And last year we saw many large companies we're all familiar with be significantly impacted by ransomware attacks. And then of course, as we were talking about empty lots, scams, and LLC frauds, I think that also falls into the bucket of seller impersonation and encompasses the fraudulent preparation of documents, IDs, selling, land that does not have a mortgage on it, that is, open, and maybe doesn't have a lot of activity in the public record. So definitely hot areas that businesses are seeing in these attempts to obtain their fraudulent funds. Anything else we're missing here or you want to know?
So I think all of those are a threat. There is one critical point I just want to add, as this is really just another form of payment fraud for any of these types of scenarios. But I just think it's very critical to point out that ACH fraud and check fraud is still very common. Have a lot of clients that, because of the wire concern, they're wanting to use more checks, right? But keep in mind that checks contain all the account details a fraudster needs. And we're seeing, that mail is being stolen a lot more often, and that's become, a major target. So I just want to make sure that our companies aren't overlooking that risk.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's important to keep in mind so that you're not overcorrecting in one direction and exposing yourself to additional vulnerabilities. So business owners should really be mindful of the different fraud vectors out there, but we want to go back to our attendees and we want to hear from you all. So which of the following, we got another poll question, so which of the following types of cyber attacks have you seen most often in the past 12 months? So go ahead, answer, let us know what you're seeing. And Nikki, from the banking side, from the customers and clients that you're working with, what are you seeing most often?
This is such a great question. In my experience, still the most common fraud attempts around, phishing and the business email compromise, because it's easier and it's cheaper for the fraudsters to actually, get information that way. But they're also becoming incredibly sophisticated at impersonating legitimate parties to manipulate some of these transactions. It's critical to stay alert of some of those threats. LLC fraud has actually been around the banking industry for a long time, but for us, it was mostly for money laundering or vendor fraud. But here's a couple of things that might shine some light on this if any of you are impacted by it. But an LLC fraud in a money laundering scenario could be, a bad actor creates a fake LLC with a name almost identical to a legitimate property owner's LLC, but changing something small that typically can go unnoticed, like maybe, company CO to LLC, but using forged documents. They'll list high value property for sale at convenience of a buyer to close a deal. But by the time the real owner realizes what's happened, the fraudsters have already disappeared with the proceeds. So that scheme has been used over the years for money laundering, working with, criminal networks to move some of those stolen funds around to different LLCs to make the dirty money appear legitimate.
Wow. That they're getting crafty, and you really have to be diligent when you're getting these contracts in from the various parties and just reviewing the transaction. Thank you for sharing that story, Nikki. And I was reading an article too to add to that recently about malicious Google or Gmail or email calendar invites. So they'll send what looks to be a legitimate calendar or event invite from your company. And if you click on the link in that calendar invite, it leads to a malicious link, giving them access to your emails. So really being cognizant of all these different ways and looking at our poll results, phishing and business email compromise top from our attendees, and empty lot scams coming in second there. And it really, again, it aligns with what we're seeing from our customers. In that survey we did, 92% of our customers said that the phishing was the type of cyber attack that they had seen the most. So truly important to know that fraud is obviously not static. There's many different ways that they're going about trying to get the money from these transactions. And, as technology evolves, the threats continue to change. Traditional forms of fraud have given way to more complex and innovative techniques. It seems like as we get better at mitigating the fraud, they get better at finding new ways to attack us. And so, one of the emerging trends that we've been seeing that I want to dive into is deepfake, and as a result of, fraud prevention methods, have to keep up with this new fraud attempt that's emerging. So for those of you that are not familiar, AI is a big talking point, but deepfake is a type of synthetic media that uses artificial intelligence, AI, and deep learning techniques to create highly realistic but entirely fabricated content. So these are text, audio, images, video. So think your IDs, think of any proof of life videos, think of any calls, confirmation calls that you're having with parties to your transaction. They're able to create those and mimic the actual person or customer that you think that you should be speaking to. And they're able to download and create those imageries from all of the presence that people have online, on Google and Facebook, all of those platforms where people's personalities, images, and pictures are available. And I think we were reading the 2025 Intrinsic Identity Fraud Report, and this was a staggering statistic that I wanted to share with everyone to really show you how the volume is increasing. A deepfake attempt occurred once every 5 minutes in 2024. So in the time we've been on this call, Nikki, multiple deepfake attempts have been attempted on businesses. If that's not staggering, I'm not really sure what is.
Pretty scary.
Yeah, and I think in the context of, wire fraud, deepfake technology poses a significant threat because, they're using this to bypass some of the banking biometric securities that are put in place. And then, of course, title and escrow companies and real estate companies that are using tools like ID verification, proof of life to really combat this, they have to be extra diligent because deepfake is being used most prominent. So 41% of the fraudsters have been using deepfake, and then of course coming in hot second to that is video on screen. So creating videos, green screens or video impersonations of themselves being the customer or person that they're supposed to be working with. So really scary stuff, Nikki. I mean,
that is scary. And if that's happening every 5 minutes in 2024, then we know that's going to just, that time span's going to get shorter and shorter, as things evolve. But I agree, deepfake technology is evolving at an alarming rate. And our fraudsters and bad actors are finding new ways to weaponize it against us, which is always going to make a new threat to us, right? But even more concerning, the scam calls are also being used to capture voice samples. We've heard that recently. But that can be, if you think about just these scam calls that, are answered, they may only need like a few seconds of a sample of your voice to manipulate you or, mimic your real identity, right? So it's hard for us in business now when we're having to rely solely on voice and video verification. So to stay ahead of that, we think that our businesses should implement those multi-layered authentication tools. Verify different transactions through a known number, one that you have on file, rather than responding to emails or responding to phone numbers in that email, especially when you're dealing with high-risk transactions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've been strategic when I get those robocalls. If I answer them by accident, I never confirm who they're speaking to, just so they never know who's on the phone. So for that exact reason, they can't take my voice sampling and start using it elsewhere. I think that's it. Hearing these statistics and those stories, obviously every time I hear them, I get scared, and maybe we've scared a few of our attendees. But I want to dive into the good news that there are ways that we can, approach security to help combat these attacks. And really, what can companies do to make sure that they're securing themselves the best ways possible when these things do happen? Because as we see from the statistics, if it hasn't happened to your business yet, it probably will here in the new future. So being prepared for it. And we really like to think about this from a multi-layered approach. You know, security encompasses three big buckets for us and how we think about this, and that's people, process, and technology. You know, and if you empower each of those areas in your business, you'll be able to really make a multi-layered approach to combat wire fraud attacks in your business. You know, people are the core of title and escrow companies, our leaders. I want to dive into that, Nikki, just how critical that first line of defense is against these attacks.
I agree. And I love that people is the first, right? Because they are our first and most critical line of defense against fraud. So not only are we protecting our company, but we're also protecting our people too. So while technology has made it so much harder for, you know, your bad actors to hack into certain systems and log directly into banking systems or software, they're going to rely on manipulating somebody, whether it's an employee, a client, a business partner, because they're going to need somebody to move money for them to actually make that transaction. This is why constantly staying in the know, learning, reviewing your fraud prevention strategies and best practices are going to be key. But making sure that everything that you learn, you're also sharing with your people and your employees so that they can always be aware. One key rule that I like to tell our clients is banks will never email unexpected wire transfer requests or send anything to any of the individuals, you know, that we're working with. So that is always something I want to make sure I throw out there, because that happens a lot when it comes to, you know, some of these email transactions between our clients and our vendors.
Makes sense. Email from the bank can be a red flag. But I completely agree with what you discussed there, Nikki. And you mentioned the importance of continuous training. And I think this is a really powerful area that businesses should really evaluate. And it's really crucial when it comes to making sure your people are armed with information. Just to go back to our survey, just looking at it, 40% of the companies who responded said that they only train new hires or do an annual training. And while that may be effective, it's really creating some gaps. Things are changing rapidly within a year. And also, if you're only doing training at new hire, you know, someone can be with your company for a while before they re-engage with trends or what's happening with your company. And I've seen a lot of my customers that I work with be successful in this area by implementing monthly or quarterly training. And even if there's no change to your process or technology or anything to your business, those meetings and gatherings provide a forum for your team members to talk to you about what they're seeing. So what type of phishing emails they're seeing come through, what type of, you know, transactions they see come through that they may have mitigated, and then leaders that are attending conferences or attending webinars like this to be able to take that information back to their team members and share and have a conversation with them about what's happening so that they know what to be mindful of and what to look out for as they're going through their day-to-day jobs. So really keeping that training going so everyone can remain vigilant and stay in that mindset. Also in the survey, a lot of the title and escrow companies that we work with said that their common fraud prevention methods were phone callbacks and collecting seller IDs. And, you know, while those are great, those are also not always enough. You know, it's really essential to enhance that verification process and dive in there and make sure you're doing it throughout the transaction. Don't wait to just closing, day before closing, or getting to the closing table thinking that that will help. You want to be starting from the beginning. As soon as you receive that contract or make contact with that party you're going to be working with. I think the important thing and powerful thing about people is that most companies have designed a customer service experience. They know what they want their customers to feel like when they're working with them. But the beauty part about that is that you can throw some confetti in that customer service experience that's, you know, throws the fraudsters off their games. You know, having attention to detail. You're working with a client, you know, that client has 2 kids that play soccer, or, you know, they just recently went on vacation. Being able to ask them about those detailed moments, or just be able to pull things from your conversations with them throughout the transaction that a fraudster wouldn't know or couldn't answer on the fly really helps to create that genuine interaction, but then also protect yourself and raise any red flags if you think something might go awry. Because at any point in the transaction, unfortunately, things could switch. Start great, and by the time you're getting to the closing table, maybe someone has infiltrated the conversation, and it opens up the parties you're working with to communicate with you about what they're seeing. And of course, with the seller IDs, we talked about how it's being replicated and what deepfakes are doing. So it's really important when you're looking at those seller IDs or you're doing follow-up conversations, videos to confirm the identities of the parties, that you're using some of these techniques here. And I know everyone might think, oh, these are easy to spot. It's getting good, guys, so you have to pay close attention. But any varying tone inflection, blurring in the face, going off screen, relevancy of speech, again, you're asking questions and the answers are not aligning with what you're asking, or any unnatural blinking or movements that's happening on screen. So paying close attention to those things. And I always say, trust your gut. Something feels off, verify, verify, verify. So that leads us to our next topic of process. How are we doing that verification, and what processes do we put in place to make sure that that's happening? With the customers I work with at Qualia, we really do a lot of work on their workflow and process. And a lot of the companies I've seen successful with this have implemented utilizing tasking in their title production platform for automations for their customers and for their team members to create that accountability. So one, to be able to tell their customers, hey, this is what you can expect from us in our transaction, so that if you do happen to get emails from random sources, you know that that's not from us and not how we promise to interact with you. But then also hold your team members accountable. If they're supposed to be using a tool, checking off that they use the tool, they've used the secure portal for documentation, making sure that all of that is tracked, and there's a history of communication between team members. So if you have multiple people working on an order, everyone is in alignment about what has occurred and the conversations that are happening with the customers. Nikki, you also mentioned the importance of multi-factor authentication. And, I would be remiss if I didn't call out Alta's best practices here. They require the use of a multi-factor authentication, but they now also require a password management plan with specific measures and timely software updates. So again, further enhance that protection and process for your team. And then having that WISP, written information security plan, it's really critical that you have that set up for your company and everyone's aware of it. So if something should happen, they know immediate what steps to take and who they should contact in that process. So definitely an important element. And I think an important thing that this conversation has highlighted even further is maintaining strong banking relationships. Who are you working with at your banks? You've shared with us, Nikki, your experiences with your customers and a wealth of information. So it's really beneficial to stay connected with those banking relationships. Anything else I'm missing in regards to process?
I'm not really missing. I'm just going to add a couple of things that, I think I can relate this to any industry, but especially in the banking industry. It's very similar. With process, you have to have that, from, A to Z, right? Whatever your process is going to be, but it has to be followed through at all times. Even, not being pushed through like a fire drill transaction. What we've seen on the banking side is your bad actors and your fraudsters thrive on urgency. They want it done now, and they're going to keep emailing and calling or whatever it is that they're doing to get that done. And that's because once that money is gone, it's usually gone, right? So making sure that you stick to that process, but you have, room to pivot in the future if anything changes. We hear from our clients all the time on different attempts, and luckily having those processes in place have really helped them target some of those things. But most commonly, what we've seen with some of our clients that have had that attempt is they might be working with a real estate agent or, even a buyer or a seller that is really pushing to get that done and get it done fast. And those situations highlight why sticking to verification protocols no matter the urgency, is essential because, I mean, it's there to protect you and your people, as mentioned earlier, but sticking to it.
Yeah, that's really important. I think I agree from our end as well. A lot of our customers, abandon their process in pursuit of trying to please someone involved in the transaction or just moving really quickly. So it's really important taking time to slow down. And I think another area that's important for businesses is when you do have those challenging customers or individuals that are coming to you and need to move quickly, having a process in place so that your team feels supported and has an outlet to ask those questions or express any hesitations that they're feeling, so that they don't feel inclined to just move through without following the process. They're able to stop and say, hey, manager, or hey, channel, this is what's going on. I have a feeling, but they're pushing to move to such and such speed. They have a way to feel supported in that process so that they don't abandon the procedures and security that we put in place, trying to please, those customers. And while they're important to the business, security is also important to the business and the reputation of the business. So I think in all of the areas we talked about, people and process, and even what the fraudsters are using, technology touches each part of it. The fraudsters and criminals are using technology against us. And as they get better with technology, we also have to use technology to combat what they're sending our way. And while people and process, as we discussed, are great, it's not enough, and it helps to put technology in our pocket and use it to work with us and also gain the efficiency we need, because ultimately we are still working on a time frame to make our customers and clients happy and get these transactions moving out the door. So I think a couple of things to highlight here as far as technology is to, one, communicate and secure portals. So, we talked about business email compromise being the number one, and of course, phishing coming through our emails. So being able to use secure portals for that communication with our agents, our buyers, our sellers, our lenders, so that it's much harder for these fraudsters to get into the middle of our conversation and duplicate information. And then, being able to use that secure portal to send documentation between the parties, again, reducing the risk that it falls into the wrong hands. The other thing is adopting a wire fraud detection tool. Now, there are a lot of solutions out there, but you want to leverage a tool that looks at multiple variables. We talked about how the fraudsters are replicating these images with deepfake. So we want to use a tool that's looking at different points of information to make sure we're really working with the correct person. We also want a tool that's going to verify the ID. Is it a government issued ID? Is it missing any of the details or categories that would create a flag or area of concern for us? And then while there are a lot of options, you also want to consider one when it comes to wire fraud detection that offers public record checks. That's also important. We've talked about how the fraudsters are using the public records to create these fake documents. So using a tool that checks an individual's digital footprint across various data sets can really, again, help ensure you're working with real or legitimate people. But then it also increases the efficiency of your transactions, as your team may not have to rely or add in additional steps like using KBA or knowledge-based assessments in the transaction. So really just arming yourself with those tools to make sure you are giving your best foot as far as combating wire fraud. Anything on the technology front, Nikki?
Yes, and I agree with all the things that you said. Technology is a powerful tool, but it's only as strong as how you're going to use it. So knowing your technology partners is key. I mean, the bank has to do that. We evaluate our current partners all the time to just see where our risk is. But even the things like the secure emails and the client portals, like you mentioned earlier, just knowing some of the clients that I've worked with in the past, that's an inconvenience to them, right? So they may push to, do something outside of those technology tools or any other processes that you're doing. But we have to remind them all the time that we're protecting sensitive information. And I think that helps ease the pain a little bit, but we have to tell them, like, these are the processes and the tools that we're using, especially around the client portals and the secure emails. It's to protect them and any other information that's being shared. Because what we do know is your bad actors will exploit any weak link. So staying proactive with securities and systems and controls is going to be key to making sure that everything's staying, tight and zipped up.
Agreed. One quick thing I want to add here too, throughout all of these areas that we've talked about today, I think an important thing to call out here is change management. As you're introducing new technology, new process, or new people, making sure that you're managing that change amongst your organization. So really being clear about all the stakeholders involved in the conversation and really implementing efforts for helping people adopt the change and utilizing those champions in your organization as markers for really driving the rest of the team. And again, using kind of those training sessions or weekly meetings, monthly meetings you're having with your team as opportunities for those champions and other team members to share their successful and unsuccessful, unfortunately, attempts that might be happening, or sharing what they're hearing from other companies that they're working with. But really having those change management tools in place as you're building out each of these areas is really impactful. But I think we've covered a lot of different things and given our attendees a couple various areas to think about. Nikki, any final thoughts?
Yeah, some of these things we've already talked about, but I feel like we can't say it enough, but it's so important to evaluate your partners, look at who you're using for your different software, cybersecurity companies, your current bank, any other systems that you're using. Think of them as your partners. As a banker, I'm my client's partner. So I want to make sure that I'm a part of, anything that they have, happening in their day-to-day business, right? So really make sure you're evaluating those partners, making sure that you have the right tools in place. You're keeping up with the industry changes. We know the competition is out there and we have to stay competitive, but we also really need to, stay in tune with what's changing out there. But when it comes to banking and fraudulent transactions and wire fraud, a lot of what we talked about today, who do you contact at your bank? Make sure your team knows that. Who do you contact? What is the next steps? Because even if you've had a fraud attempt and it was not successful, I think you still need to let your banker know. Because for me, my perspective is I'd rather know that there was an attempt and have something out there, alerting my team so that if something comes through in an email or something like that, they immediately know, wait, there was an attempt. And that just helps us, stay vigilant as well on your end. But these are things that we have to look at the bank side as well. We're constantly looking at these things to see where we might need to pivot and, make things a little bit more secure on our back end. So I certainly think that having these strategy and brainstorming sessions with our clients is key for success on both parties.
Agreed. Crime thrives in the darkness. So when you're silent or you go hide under a rock, while it may feel embarrassing, it happens. It happens to companies. We've seen it happen to large companies, small companies. So it's really important that you are sharing, communicating with the parties that you're working with, so that any of those points that may have been targeted, everyone can continue to firm up those areas. If there's phishing attempts, everyone can really check their malware, check their emails, and be able to really identify where the gaps are. But that only happens kind of with communication and everyone having an open discussion about this. The fraudsters are sharing information, they're getting better. We too as an industry also have to get better with it. And I really think it's important that you really decide the process. I think, Nikki, like you said, you know, even if it's just an attempt, or even if it hasn't happened to you yet, you haven't seen it yet, but you know that it's out there and that it's occurring, have the discussions with your team now. Hey, if this scenario A was to happen, who's going to be the point person? What's our contact? What's our channel of communication? If it has happened to you, what have you learned from that experience and what can we improve? And just really making sure you have those things in place before something else or anything should happen. Really, it's like, you know, estate planning. They say you plan, you hope it doesn't happen anytime soon, but you plan for it so that everyone's prepared and that everyone that you're working with is also prepared for these scenarios. So really important to prepare and arm your team with the resources that they're needed. And speaking of resources, Jeremy called it out when we were first getting started that there are quite a few handouts that have been provided to you all from Alta that talk about cyber fraud and wire fraud security. And then the Alta cyber page has also been linked, so you all can venture to that page if you want to dive deeper, see any policies or examples of things that you might be looking to implement for your companies for wire fraud. So leverage those tools, ask questions to your industry partners. Don't go silent or fall into the dark, because we want to see you, we want to hear, and we want to be able to support our customers and clients in this navigating these dark waters. So really important there. Well, that was a great discussion. I think we're nearing the end of our time together, but Jeremy, maybe we have a few minutes for questions from our attendees.
Yeah, Jewel and Nikki, thank you. Yeah, great conversation. And I spaced and failed to upload some additional documents. I put a link in the chat box to Alta's outgoing wire preparation checklist and the rapid response plan for wire fraud incidents. Both documents are very helpful to prepare to prevent, or what happens if a wire fraud happens. Nikki mentioned it, reporting quickly, sooner than later. We encourage our members to report fraud attempts to ic3.gov. We had a question about, they hope federal law enforcement are going after these bad actors wherever they are. We've worked with several folks at the FBI. They're doing all they can, but as Jewel shared in the data, it's nonstop. So, and it takes time to build cases, but the FBI is definitely working behind the scenes, and we encourage you to help report and show the prevalence of these attacks to ic3.gov. I can put the link in the chat as well. And
just one thing to add there, Jeremy, is that reporting also helps, the government agencies see the trends. So you may not realize that you might be working with an affiliated group or fraudsters that have been targeting, a specific type of action, but the federal government and all these agencies have that information behind the scenes. So as you're reporting, you're creating that paper trail for those agencies to track down those fraudsters. So we hope we're catching them, and we're also contributing to the paper trail to catch them.
Yeah. A couple questions on ID verification. Morgan asked if you recommend using a third-party company to verify IDs. Are there pros and cons to that?
So I would say as much integration you have as possible is obviously preferred. You don't have any breaks in where the majority of your team is operating, but using a tool is always better than not using a tool. So we definitely encourage the use of a tool. I think there are more pros than there are cons. I think, having that extra backup besides what your team is doing is really important. And again, technology is just enhancing what your team is doing and making sure you've checked all the boxes and can pull more information than maybe your team has access to available.
And kind of along the same theme, a question from Michelle. Do you feel which do you feel is more important, ID verification using a state issued license, or account owner verification for seller proceeds?
Nikki, I'll let you take that one first.
Was that account, what was the second part of that? Account caller?
Or account owner verification.
I mean, I really think they kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you have to verify the account owner information and then verify it with the legitimate IDs. I don't know if one is more important than the other, because I really think you kind of have to partner them two together.
Agree, both.
All right, Jewel, maybe a question for you. And Quali has a product for wire fraud detection. It's called Shield, I believe. And maybe, you know, I don't know how it's actually, you know, integrated. Is it integrated into the Quali TPS, or is it like kind of an add-on, you know, technology that then, you know, the title agent would, you know, use?
Yeah, so I don't want to make it a quality webinar or any advertisement, but it is integrated in our title production software. So everything is happening in the platform, again, creating security.
Yeah, no, I know it's not a quality, but, you know, people want to know what the solutions are. And we have mentioned, you know, there are, you know, other providers out there. And as you mentioned, and Nick, you mentioned, talk with the vendors, vet them, you know, really understand, you know, what they do, how they do it, how they protect data, how they store data. All important questions to ask before you know, commit to, you know, using a partner.
Agreed. I think it's really important for us when a lot of our customers and clients come to us, is understanding your current process today. You know, a lot of people, especially now, are making changes and want to do something differently. So it's important to, you know, tell us like, hey, this is what we've been doing, this is what we have in place. And then it becomes much easier for us to be able to say, great, this is where the tool or technology can enhance what you have in place or fix maybe some of the gaps that you're seeing with what you have in place. So again, just going back to that communication about your process and not shying away from being open and maybe vulnerable about these conversations.
Yeah.
Something else I just want to add to that, having those conversations with your partners can open up a lot of opportunity that maybe either your software, your banker, or any other company you're working with may not have, you know, exposed a certain product or tool to you because they didn't think it was a need at one time, but now it has. So, you know, just making sure you're having those conversations so that you can just reevaluate.
All right, Nikki, I think a question for you as far as maybe what you're seeing at the banking, from the banking perspective. From Tracy, are fraudsters at the point of making fake driver's licenses that have embedded ink that also shows under a black light? Just wondering, because we do have a machine to put IDs under to check them.
I have not seen any of those, but that is a good takeaway because that could eventually start, you know, hitting us before too long. That's interesting.
Imagine if you created that scenario or seen that scenario, then it's happening.
Yes. It's probably going to come across my desk like very soon.
Yes. My rule of thumb is if it's in a movie on television, it's already happening. It's already been created. So that's definitely really an important call out for even the rest of our attendees. So thank you for asking that question, to be mindful of that. And again, checking those IDs are really important.
Yep.
I mean, we've said it before on these conversations, like just the fake IDs that are different from, you know, years ago when someone was making it in the basement versus now is so different. And that, I mean, it's probably pretty easy to buy the software that you need to create those.
Yeah. Less of a question, but just, you know, to you know, supporting your comment, Jewel, that, you know, this really starts at the top and empowering staff to be able to, you know, pause, stop, you know, if they sense something is wrong, and, you know, do the right thing at the end of the day. Along those lines, we actually have a webinar on February 10th on change management and how to go about getting your staff to, you know, understand why you're pivoting and doing these processes and why it's very important. So, you know, watch out for marketing for that. You know, Steve Rudolph will be giving that presentation, and especially on how to, you know, address AI. I mean, that's just a whole nother bucket. You know, Joel, you talked about AI and deep fakes, but, you know, that's just, we could have several webinars on, you know.
Yeah, I think AI is one of those things where it's a coin. There's the head, the tail, there's a pros and there's cons to it. So in the same way, people are leveraging AI to make themselves more efficient, to, speed up business production and really, optimize their business process. Also, our fraudsters are using it to optimize their fraud process. So definitely a dual-sided coin there, and really important to talk to your team about it. I think it's one of those things, again, you can't go under a rock and hide from it and say, hey, I'm just not going to deal with it. It's here, it's impacting businesses. So you have to have the conversations with your team about it. And I think, Jeremy, you said a really good thing about change management that we talk about a lot with our customers is why? Why are we doing the things that we're doing? I think that is very, very impactful for people to adopt change. Just telling someone they have to do something, they might do it for the sake of obviously their job or whoever's communicating it to them. But if they're understanding the methodology behind it, it helps them to really be more receptive of adopting it and really putting into practice what you're setting forth. So I'm excited for the change management webinar. Can't emphasize that enough.
All right, Cindy said black lights can work, but ID verification is the best.
Right.
All right, yeah, Kimberly.
I can tell you, even back in the day when you used like the markers for the $100 bills, you'd see at the store, the banks use those. It eventually got to a point where, wait, they all check out on that. And then the strips came along with the dollars. You'd hold them up and you'd see that, and then that didn't work anymore. So it's constantly something we're going to have to, pair our basic knowledge with, the new things that are changing.
Yeah. All right, we just have one more question in the queue, and it was early on when we were talking about the different flavors of the fraud. And Lisa was hoping one of you could expand on LLC fraud and kind of what that entails and what it is.
I think, Nikki, you touched on a scenario there if you wanted to dive into that just a little bit more.
Yeah, so I can tell you LLC fraud from like the banking perspective, and Jewel may have, a different way of looking at that. But for us, LLC fraud has been around just on like the money laundering side of things. That was where companies were creating, these fake LLC companies. But and then of course laundering money and moving money around into these fake shell companies, to make an illegal business look legitimate. However, what we're seeing now that has come up in the title space with some of our clients is, when you're verifying a business entity, you may go out, and look at court docs, you may do all of those things. And sometimes it's just a small change, like changing, company, the abbreviation CO to LLC, which are things that are easily overlooked. And then, or even like a simple like name change or things like that. And then what happens is they have these, these fake properties or whatever that they're trying to create a transaction on under that fake LLC. And by the time any of that, comes to light, the money's gone.
I think you highlighted two things, too, Nikki, that I saw from kind of the title world before my time at Qualia is really looking at those corporate documents is really important, and inconsistencies in those. So many times we would get fraudulent member managed documents or managed documents, and all of a sudden it has a new person in there, and they may send us old ones, from prior years that have certain members, and then an updated one all of a sudden with new members and there's no clear, transaction or transfer of power information in those documents. So that would regularly raise suspicion for us. And then also, anytime we saw a quitclaim deed from an individual into an LLC, immediately a red flag. What's going on here? Why was this quickly recorded? Sometimes it was done pretty close to the time that we've gotten the contract, which was immediately a red flag. So looking at things like that from the title perspective are really important, and especially when you call to dig deep and explore those powers as far as the power to sell, who has the authority to sell. And I've found that, and you touched on this, Nikki, is when the urgency and the pushy comes, why do you need that? Why do I have to show you that? I gave you this, I gave you that. And then all of a sudden you see that the conversation's turning, that's when you can start to obviously raise those suspicious flags and say, hey, maybe something's not right here because I can't seem to get the consistent information I need to have the right person conducting this transaction for the business.
There's a couple of other points I'd like to mention. And again, this is from the money laundering perspective, but it's something that you could see on your end. But especially around like the LLC fraud and things like that, we've seen it to where, they may even have a couple of different, layers in there. So like we mentioned change management earlier, but I know that's typically more on system, but look for any changes in the ownership with those LLCs, because sometimes it can just almost be confusing trying to figure out who has that authority. But really looking at some of those recent changes is going to be, pretty key. But pay attention to the things that might be obvious, which are things like maybe inflated price that they might be, trying to purchase it at that, and a lot of times it's because they're trying to launder money through that LLC. So anyway, there's a lot of different factors in there and a lot of different scenarios, but just verifying everything that you can will definitely keep it at bay.
Good tips on the LLC fraud attempts. Kimberly threw in the chat box, don't rely on the corporate docs that the customer provides. Look them up yourself on the state website. So,
Yes.
Yes.
good advice. All right, we're going to wrap up. If you missed parts of today's webinar, or if you think others in your office would benefit from listening, as I mentioned earlier, recording of the presentation will be emailed tomorrow. We'll also have a link to download a copy of the PDF of the presentation as well. And you can always access our webinar archive at alta.org/webinars. All right, great stuff on wire fraud and other fraud attempts. Jewel, I saw over the wire a couple of articles about Qualia made a pretty big acquisition of RamQuest and eClosing. So congratulations on that. Sounds like you're going to have a lot more agents and partners to work with.
Yeah, we're humbled and we're appreciative and we're excited for the partnership and to work together strategically. So more to come, but definitely excited, and we're really looking forward to the momentum ahead.
Yeah. All right.
Congratulations on that. That's awesome.
All right, well, Jewel, Nikki, thank you for taking some time and sharing your expertise on wire fraud and helping our members keep the money and their customers' money safe.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. Thank you, Jeremy, for having me.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.